Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly captivating and profound work, Marjane Satrapi's acclaimed graphic novel memoir, Persepolis, The Story of a Childhood. This isn't just some dry recount of historical facts. It's an absolute masterclass in using visual storytelling to navigate this incredibly complex intersection of geopolitical upheaval and a young girl's coming of age. It's a fascinating journey, and I am so excited to unpack this material with you.
Right off the bat, the author hits us with this incredible line. I wanted to be justice, love, and the wrath of God all in one. As a young kid, Marjane literally imagined herself as the last prophet. And this childhood ambition perfectly frames the massive historical scope of the story we're about to explore. We're going to see how a child, who is deeply religious but fiercely independent, tries to reconcile her own grand ideals of justice with a world that is just rapidly shifting beneath her feet.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for The Explainer. 1. Context: the Iranian Revolution. 2. A child's perspective. 3. Symbols of repression. 4. War and lost innocence. And 5. The personal and political.
All right, starting off with Section 1, Context: the Iranian Revolution.
To really grasp Marjane's story, we have to understand the sweeping geopolitical shifts of late 20th century Iran that completely rewrote her reality. In 1979, mass protests overthrew the American-backed Shah, an autocratic leader known both for modernizing the country and for relying on a pretty brutal secret police. Now, this revolution was initially supported by a lot of people seeking freedom, but by 1980, it resulted in the rise of a conservative Islamic Republic. And right on the heels of that massive internal shift, the devastating 8-year Iran-Iraq war kicked off. It's just a staggering amount of change for one nation to go through in such a short period of time.
Moving right along to Section 2, A Child's Perspective.
So how does all of this huge national upheaval actually affect daily life? Well, we're going to zoom in to see how these high-stakes political forces literally altered the atmosphere in one family's living room. And this brilliantly illustrates the core tension of the entire memoir. You see, the Satrapi family is highly educated, westernized, and secular. So indoors, they're reading about revolutionaries, they're listening to Western music, throwing parties. But outdoors, the state dictates a strictly religious conservative code. For a kid trying to figure out how the world works, this jarring contrast between the total freedom inside her home and the rigid repression outside creates immense confusion and conflict.
Which brings us to Section 3, Symbols of Repression.
Because Persepolis is a graphic novel, the visual symbols carry massive thematic weight. Satrapi doesn't just tell us about repression, she draws it. For instance, immediately following the revolution, the veil becomes mandatory for women and girls. It's introduced as this sudden, totally physical manifestation of state control. Practically overnight, the bilingual co-ed French schools that Marjane loved were outlawed, suddenly deemed symbols of Western decadence. The veil becomes this really powerful visual boundary, effectively separating Iran from the modern world and fundamentally changing how women are forced to exist in public.
And Marjane herself admits, "I really didn't know what to think about the veil." Deep down, she felt deeply religious, but her family was very modern. This quote highlights her childhood confusion so perfectly. These state-sponsored religious changes feel entirely baffling to a child who's caught in the middle. True religious faith is deeply personal, right? But here, it's being co-opted as a mandatory government rule, completely stripping away her individual agency.
Now, what's really interesting about this detail is Uncle Anoush's bred swan. Anoush is Marjane's uncle, a former political prisoner who essentially becomes her hero. Before his execution by the new regime, he gives Marjane a swan that he sculpted out of prison bread. It is a stunning, heartbreaking symbol of maintaining one's humanity, dignity, and capacity to create art even while locked in the most dreadful, degraded circumstances imaginable.
Let's just pause and let the audience breathe for a second. How does a child process a world of constant war and shifting regimes? How do you grow up when the rules change daily and the people you look up to are imprisoned or killed?
The answer, unfortunately, is that you grow up entirely too fast. Let's shift focus to Section 4, War and Lost Innocence.
The historical data here is just stark. Across these conflicts, over 1 million people died. Tehran was subjected to terrifying ballistic missile attacks. And Marjane experiences this terror firsthand when the home of her Jewish neighbors, the Baba Levi family, is completely destroyed. She is deeply traumatized after seeing her friend's severed arm in the rubble. It is a devastating, totally inescapable reality.
And that grim reality brings us to maybe one of the most heartbreaking details in the source text.
the plastic key painted gold. The state handed out these cheap little trinkets to young schoolboys, basically telling them that if they died as martyrs on the front lines of the war, this key would guarantee them entry into a glorious heaven. It is a devastatingly manipulative piece of propaganda used to brainwash lower-class children into willingly walking into a slaughter.
What makes the plastic key even more tragic is who receives it. Marjane realizes that these keys are only given to lower-class boys. The rich boys, they aren't fed these stories. She says, the reason for my shame and for the revolution is the same, the difference between social classes. She is profoundly recognizing the deep, fatal class divides in her country, where poor children are essentially used as cannon fodder, while others remain relatively protected.
This brings us to our final segment, Section 5, the personal and political. In a world this volatile, we see how the macro-level history perfectly intersects with the micro-level memoir. Under a repressive regime, the separation between public conformity and private individuality completely vanishes. As the text notes, even private choices behind closed doors, like owning posters, listening to Western music, making wine, or just hosting a party, became high-stakes, illegal acts that could lead to severe beatings or arrest. Just trying to assert your individuality in any way becomes an inherently political act.
So as Marjane enters her teenage years amid all this trauma, she's naturally seeking some control. She ends up smoking a stolen cigarette to rebel against her mother's strict rules, calling it her transition into adulthood. It's a flawed, childish, yet incredibly necessary symbol of rebellion. War has really complicated her coming of age. She's forced to grow up quickly to process trauma, yet she still retains the immature, rebellious instincts of a normal teenager.
Ultimately, though, her rebellious nature makes her a target. She speaks out against teachers, she even slaps a principal, making it extremely dangerous for her to remain in Iran. So the crucial point is this: to survive as an outspoken, independent woman, she tearfully has to leave her family and her beloved, complex homeland behind, escaping to Vienna to find freedom and continue her education.
We've seen how Marjane Satrapi's deeply personal story is inextricably linked to the history of Iran. And it leaves us with this really profound question to reflect on. How much of our own identity is shaped by the political landscape we are born into? Think about your own life, the history surrounding you, and how it has molded who you are today. Thank you so much for exploring this incredible explainer with me.